In the last video, we went ahead and set up our sheet and we started writing custom functions that actually work on the fields inside the spreadsheet. So we learned how to call those functions. That's that equals get first name. We learned how to write them, and we make them return a value that is calculated from the argument that we pass in. So that was a great start, but I want to get fancier with the code we're writing and with what we're actually doing with it. And so I've added a little bit of stuff to this sheet to set us up for this next session. In particular, one thing I noticed was that it's cool we pulled out the last name, and that was a fun little problem to solve with the bands-like last name. But I wasn't sure how we would actually use the last name in an outreach script. And so what I've done is gone ahead and added a couple more rows with a couple of female target recipients here, and then also added a title column so that we have a variety of titles. And so for some of these folks, we'll use Mr. Balloon or Miss Croft, and then for others, we'll use the first name. And so that's the first change I made, is I added a couple more rows, added this column. And then the other thing I added was this personal connection column. And from talking to people who do a lot of outbounding, one thing that I've heard from them is that when you take the time and you put in the effort to look at this person's profile and figure out what you have in common, anything at all, that this is the single biggest move you can make to increase your response rate to these messages, even if it's just to not into it right now, but at least you've had that exchange. So I thought I'd throw that in. But I expect in reality, not everyone on your list is going to have a personal connection. And so that's what I've done here. I've thrown in a few, but not for everybody. And then I've got this column for message. This is the thing we're going to be building in this session. I'm actually going to write a function that will create the message based on the other fields here. And the last thing I've done for prep, just for setup, is this final column, the expected message. And so this might not seem immediately intuitive, but it's really important to have a very, very clear picture of what your outcome is meant to look like before you start writing code. And so when it was just the first name, well, that was pretty clear. We all know what these first names are. When it was the last name, it actually turned out that I didn't look closely enough and didn't really think through all the cases. When we're doing anything more complicated, like an entire message that's customized based on all these fields, we don't just jump in and start writing code and see what we get. It's really easy to get lost there and sort of lose sight of what you're even trying to do. So instead, I've gone ahead and written up what the message should look like for a couple people so that once we're writing code and the answer is appearing here, we can check it against the expected message and we'll know when we got it right. Instead of just writing code, checking it, seeing what it looks like, hoping it's okay, this is the way to go. So always be sure before you start writing code, you're really clear about what the code is supposed to do. Like, what will it look like when the code is working? How will you know it's working? And so in this case, I'll know because I'll see this message here, and I'll see this message here, and I'll see similar messages all the rest of the way down. That's our target today. Let's look a little closer at this expected message so we can see what it is we're trying to do. So I'll just get that up on the screen. I won't read it to you, but here it is. The things to point out are, first of all, Mr. Balloon. So I don't have a personal connection with this person, and so we're going to go with the more formal hi, title, last name, common, and this little excuse line. And then just going to get right to the point and say, hey, I've got this new thing that I've worked out. Would that be relevant to your work at, and then company? So we're pulling in all of that stuff for this message. Now for the second message here, let me get that up on the screen. It's different in a couple of ways. So first of all, I do have this personal connection, and so I'm going to go with the first name here, and then we follow up with I noticed the personal connection message here. Then I go straight into the same question, same pitch, same using the company name in that. So that part's going to stay the same. Just the intro, the salutation basically is what's going to vary between these two different cases. So that's what the answer should look like. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and you notice this is more complicated than the first name, last name, which basically just does the same thing to every row, every string you feed it. Whichever one you put in, it's going to pull out the same method and give you the same answer out. For this, we've got logic, we've got dependencies, we've got kind of check something and do different things depending on the answer. In particular, check for the presence of a personal connection. And if we've got one, then we're going to go with first name and we're going to go with the personal connection. And if we don't have one, then we're going to go with the title and the last name, and then we're going to throw in this pardon the message out of the blue. So That's a lot more logic and complexity than we had in the previous function. So let's just go write it and see how this shakes out. I'm going to go ahead and put this, let's do build message. And I need to pass it as arguments all of the things that it's going to need in order to create the message for each row. And so that looks like, let's see, we need the title, first name, last name, personal connection. Depending on each row, we'll need some combination of those. So we need to pass all of them. So I'm going to go with D2, E2, F2, G2. We'll pass that in. Of course, there's no such function yet, right? I just made that up. So that's not working, and that's expected. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down, and let's get a bunch of errors. Boom, there we go. The whole thing is a mess. It doesn't work at all. But it's time to jump over and define the function and start building it out so that we can get to the answer. Now, the first thing I'm going to do when I define the function is I'm going to name the arguments that we're passing in. And so I want to be sure that I remember what I'm passing, what I said I was passing, and in what order. So again, it's title, first name, last name, and personal connection. Let's jump over to the app script editor here, and let's add another function. And so start with the function keyword, just like the ones that are already here, but not in caps. Whoops. And we called that build message. And now we have to name these arguments that we're passing in. So it was, again, title, first name, last name, and the connection. So I've given them shorter names just because it's nice to be concise in code where you can. And then I'll use curly braces to enclose the body of the function. And it does have to return something to work. So for now, I'm just going to go with return a string foo, semicolon. And this is just to make sure that I've got everything wired correctly before we go and start writing a bunch of logic. So let's go back to our, yep, there we go. Foo, 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 foo. So that is clearly wrong, but that means that everything's connecting. And so when we start adding the right answer, we'll see it here. In the same way that I put foo, 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 foo in the answer slot, even though I know it's wrong, but I just wanted to have that feedback loop to see, okay, what did the code I wrote even do anything? What did it do? I'm going to progress by baby steps to get to the right answer here. And I think it can be helpful to go after the trickiest or most confusing or most ambiguous piece of functionality first. In my mind here, that's all about the fact that we have a fundamentally different message based on whether or not there's a personal connection. Like, how do we make our code do different things after checking to see if a thing is there? Like, what does that look like? If we can get that going, even if it's not the right answer, the rest of it becomes more straightforward. It's really just about putting together strings, which we already know how to do. So I'm going to go in and solve that first, and we'll come back and we'll see the results here. I just want to get different messages in each of these fields based on whether the personal connection exists or not. And so I'm going to go write that right now. Going now to the code, we are not going to return foo. We're about to get so much fancier than that. Instead, we're going to lead off with this logical check. Is there a connection or not? And so we're going to use if-else syntax to do that. And we're just going to check for the truthiness of the connection variable here in the function. That's going to look like this. If, and then after if, you put parentheses and a statement that can be evaluated for truthiness. So we're just going to check if connection. Quick word on truthiness. It's sort of a weird abstract concept maybe at this point, but the basic idea is any kind of actual value is truthy. It has substance. It's there. There's a thing. But absence of value, like an empty string or the number 0 or undefined, that's called falsy. That's nothing really there. That comes back as false. It's not strictly a true or false value, but it resembles one. So if connection looks like something like this, well, that's truthy because there's stuff inside it. It has value. But if it looks like this, that's empty. There's nothingness. That's falsy. So this syntax is all we need to check if there's a connection or not. After that, I'm going to put curly braces. And inside here, this is the code that's going to run if there is a connection. For now, let's just do return statement comes back. And let's say found a connection. We want to do something in the other case, though, too, right? If there is no connection. And so we can write else and another set of curly braces. And the code inside those is what will run anytime there is not a connection. And so we can do here, return no connection. This, when I save it and check over in the spreadsheet, should say found a connection, no connection in the appropriate column, in the appropriate row for each member of our spreadsheet. Let's go check it out. There we go. Boop, no connection. Connection. These two also have connections, but no connection here, no connection there, and found a connection. Okay, so that's it. So this is clearly still not the answer, but it's actually a lot better than foo, 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 foo. It's a lot closer. So now all we have to do is inside each of those two independent blocks, we have to write the code that will produce the message that we want. Let's go do it. I want to start with a case where we do have a connection. So I'm going to copy this expected message just so I have it for reference while I'm working. And when I pop over to the code here, I can add it as a comment by starting the line with // That means that anything that comes afterward will not be evaluated, will not be executed. It's just there for humans to look at. So here's my message as I want it to look. And I just noticed that we do use the company name, but I did not pass in the company name when I defined this, or when I filled the arguments to this function, right? It just has these, and I need to include the company. So I'm going to change the way that that works. Make sure that we're passing all these things in because we will need them. And then I'm going to update that across all of our, yep, there we go. Update that across all of our actual cells in the spreadsheet. And so now everything's broken, right? Like this is clearly not working anymore. And it's because we've got 4 here, but 5 passed in. So let me just make this update too. So we match what we're passing in with what the function is defined and expects, and save it. And with any luck, we're back to where we were. Yep, okay. So now I have access to this company too, because I'm going to need that. So that was my mistake earlier. This is why we take tiny baby steps of the way, so when we fix something, we can do it quickly instead of having to change a bunch of stuff. All right, so I'm on line 13. If connection, this is what happens. And I don't want to return this single hard-coded string. I want to return a string that's built out of the different arguments that were passed to me. So let's just go do that. The first thing is hey, space, and then the first name. After that comes comma, space I noticed, space, and then that connection. After the connection comes another space, and then it's this I've developed ... all the way to the company name. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And you notice we get a signal something went wrong. We've seen this before. It's to do with these single quotes that demarcate the strings beginning and end. Well, there's a single quote, so it looks like it's plus connection plus space I, and then just a bunch of characters that are not valid JavaScript. They're not strings anymore because they're outside of that closing quote. Can fix this in a couple ways, as we've seen. I'm going to go with double quotes instead of single quotes, so I can have a single quote inside. So I'll delete that and make a double quote instead, and then go put one at the end as well. Now we're good. So we've got this long string, and then after that we want to do plus company. And then that's it, hopefully. So I'm going to save this. Just notice Command S will save, so that saves a little time too. Back to our sheet, and we can celebrate because something happened. It's certainly starting to work, but let's be careful about, did we really get what we wanted? So hey Gaetan, hey Gaetan. Okay, so I don't know if you caught it yet, but 2 things I see. Number 1, whoops, this capital W comes from here. We might want to fix that. We could fix it just by editing this, but then there's 4 of them to edit. If you could imagine if there was 100 in the sheet, we'd probably be better off editing that in code. So we'll take that as a to-do. And then the other thing is I forgot the question mark at the end. So that I will go add right now because that's pretty easy. So plus, quote, question mark, close quote, save again. And there we go. Again, we'll come back to this capital W once we've gotten the rest of the things working. I'm going to check the rest of these while we're at it. Hey sleeve. Looks to me like these are working outside of the W. That's pretty good. Good to know. Okay, so now let's go figure out what we're saying with these no connection folks. And a similar pattern, I'm going to copy the expected message for the first one so I have it for reference. And I'm just going to paste it over this first one because I'm done with it. So In the case of else, no connection, return, we want a different string. And it's going to say hi space. And now we're going to put in that title. So title, and then we need to manually type the space inside a quote. And then we're going to do plus last name. What comes next? Comma. So comma, pardon the message out of the blue. I developed all the way up to the company name. Once again, we saw this before. And we had the same error as before. So let's fix it the same way as before. And by the way, we're doing fine, and this is coming together nicely. But if you notice that we're repeating the same issue, repeating the same mistake, repeating the same fix, that's something to pay attention to in coding, because when you're doing that, it's usually a sign that what you are working on can be simplified, can be condensed or made more concise. And we will do that with this code base. But the first time, if it's ugly and repetitive, just make it work. That's our goal. So far, so good. Relevant to your work at, and then I want to put the company. And this time I remember the question mark. And that's it. I'm going to save it and go see how this turned out. All right, checking very carefully with Mr. Balloon. Looks like it worked. Now let's see who else had no personal connection. There's Bobson. Hi, Mr. Dugnut. All right, Laura Croft. Yep, looks like that worked, okay? So this is really good enough at this point. Again, we had the one issue with capitalization, which we could go fix manually by editing this column, and then we'd be ready to ship. We'd be ready to call up our assistant and say, hey, here's the messages are ready for you to paste into whatever messaging platform. Go do it. So that's great. We could almost consider this done. But what we're going to do in the next video is clean it up a bit. So we will fix this capital W in the code, which makes it a little easier to scale this. And we will clean up some of this repetitive stuff that we saw. We'll also just make it look a little nicer. If you notice how this really long line with all these pluses and all these quotes gets a little unwieldy, we're going to address that as well. And this is pretty common in code. You first just set up your environment, and that's a good bit of the work, and you figure out what the answer looks like, and that takes a lot of time. And then you go make something ugly but functional. And then the last phase is to clean it up and make it nice so that it's easier to read and easier to continue building out.